It's the last day of July and the perfect time to grade the Indiana Pacers offseason. We get into all the big moves individually, the offseason as a whole, the draft, everything with Jake Query on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, happy Wednesday and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today it's the last day of July, and we're going to look back at what the Pacers have done to construct their team for next season. Grades for all the Pacers' major, even to minor moves. The big ones: Siakam resigns, Toppin resigns, Nembhard extends. The lesser ones: Wiseman signs up, James Johnson is back. The draft, we cut through all of it. And who better than Jake Query, a first-time guest to join us from 107.5 The Fans. Query and company getting into each move one by one, some big picture stuff, and then a grade for the whole offseason for the largely running it back Indiana Pacers. Good stuff. We had some tech issues is the wrong word, but it was Zoom recorded, so this is the last time you'll see this fun, fancy graphic. So apologies for the different audio and video quality you may get today. Tomorrow, it's August 1st. It's a new month. Free agency is largely over. We'll do the last off-season-y show talking about moves the Pacers can still make this summer. Friday, we pivoted to a little bit of Olympic mode, and then we get into the depths of the offseason with some zanier content, which we'll talk about more tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show, doing off-season grades with Jake Query, the man, the myth, the legend, and a first-time guest here today. It's Jake Query from 107.5 The Fans. Query and company. Query, who's been your favorite company ever since that was the name of the program?
Oh, man, it had to be you, right? Even though this is the first time you've had me on your podcast. So that dipped you down a little bit. Fed a lot, but I'll put you up there because you're always a good sport when we joke and talk about things. And my condolences on the passing of Pepper. And my cat may make a cameo in this show to make up for that, so we shall see.
We need the cat ratio to be correct at 1, so thankfully that can happen. I wish I could be Locked On Pacers and company every time I had somebody come on. I think that'd be very fitting. Today, the Pacers offseason is not done, air quotes, but pretty much. They've done their two-way stuff. James Johnson's back. We've seen all the big stuff. And we're going to grade all of these moves, A to F, or whatever grade you'd like to give Jake if you'd like to be creative and go off the ladder path. And we'll start with the big one, the one that everybody cared about the most. The reason I think you can't give the Pacers offseason worse than maybe like a C+ in general, they kept Pascal Siakam, but it was on a pricey deal. 4 years, $189 million, probably the best player they've ever signed, although they did re-sign him, which is context important. What grade do you give that move? I mean, obviously we all thought that it needed to happen for them to be a contender now, but it was a max deal over 4 years. What did you think of all that?
Probably not a popular answer here, but I'm going to go with one that I took in college a lot, the I, which is incomplete. That sounds like a cop-out. Here's the thing. Logistically, Tony, and representative or symbolically, it's an A, because it's a franchise that goes out, gets a top 5 player. Well, not a top 5 player, a top tier player, probably a top 20, 25 player in the league. My concern, as you know, from the times that we talked about it on the radio, has nothing to do with Pascal Siakam nor a knock on him at all, but simply giving a lot of money to a player that, you just never know what's going to happen now on the backside of 30. I know that they'll tell you that he has a lot more mileage on his tires than his age indicates. I certainly hope that's the case. I think he's a really good player. I think he at times can be too much of an isolation player and an offense that's a little more free-flowing. But those things can be worked out. It beats the alternative of having Haliburton be the lone star. So in that regard, obviously it's a good move. I like the fact they gave 4 years instead of 5. I was really worried about giving a max for 5. This gives them a little more flexibility. I realize you had to pay. You got to spend money to make money, right? And in that regard, I'll give it a B. The age and the fact that I feel like, and I know this is very unpopular opinion, to me, he's right on the lower rung of that top tier of player. I don't put him in the Giannis, Steph Curry, even Devin Booker kind of category. So he's right on the backside of that. But obviously it beats making that deal for him and not getting anything in return.
Yeah, has any team ever said about their 30-plus star that they think he's going to age poorly, right? Like everyone
Right.
says
Of
their
course.
guys, his game will age gracefully, and like some guys don't, obviously. And so you have to wonder if you're the Pacers, and that's why I agree with you that the 4 instead of 5 years is significant. Is that part specifically of how will he actually age in his game, especially with the Pacers team that plays quick? Like you got to be zippy to some extent to pair with this group, and he does like the isolation element you mentioned is interesting because there are some games where it feels clunky, but there are some games when they're not moving very well or they kind of feel stuck in the mud where that really helps them. Like it jolts them. It's the only thing they can do to score. That happened in game 2 in Milwaukee, for example, their first playoff win. So in some ways that's good. In other ways, I agree with you that that's bad. But he was like his bread and butter in Toronto was this spin move, this open floor game, this dynamic presence forward. Like if he can't be that guy and he's like the smooth operator at the elbow who can shoot it a little bit. What is that kind of player? To me, they had to keep him. And I said the whole time I would offer him the max day one of free agency. The fact that they were able to do it for less than 5 years is good. The fact that it's max money is the reality they were in the second they traded for him back in July. So I gave it a B when I kind of ran through it. If they could have got it to B4 for like 160 or even 3 years in some way, that could have been great. He is extension eligible in 2 years now instead of 3 if he keeps playing awesome, but are they even going to want to do that? I just think that the max money is limiting in terms of what the grade can be, but they had to do it, and they did it for less than the 5 years, which I think is why I am giving it better than just like a standard grade, even though there are certainly, as you laid out, some concerns.
Well, I think that the fact that if you're going to extend it beyond this, probably is as much about what the rest of the roster is doing in 3 or 4 years. Siakam, Pascal Siakam. Is this the introductory to a long-term window, or is this if we go with precedent? And I talk a lot about precedent, and I know it drives people crazy, but you look at the Paul George group. When Paul George, when the kind of the end came there, you really had that one window, right, with George, and when Lance Stevenson was still playing well, and George Hill. If you go back further to the Reggie Miller era, for example, you had multiple times you started out where you had group number one, which was Reggie centered around the Davises and Rick Smiths. Then you morphed it into you bring Jalen Rose into the mix, and that extends them into kind of a second window, if you will. We'll find out with Siakam based on what happens with the rest of these players, whether he's a one window or a 2 window guy.
Yeah, and Haliburton's deal is long enough that they could have 2 of those windows, especially if he becomes Supermax eligible in a few years. Move number 2, the big-ish one that everybody talked about, and the most interesting one to me on how this would shake out, Mr. Obi Toppin, 4 years, $60 million, although 58 of it is guaranteed, and there's some bonuses there we don't have to talk about. This one was fascinating to me because restricted free agency could have been to their benefit. Not a single restricted free agent switched teams, right? So it's tough for those restricted guys to go get offers from other teams and then still get matched by their incumbent team. Pacers got Toppin done before free agency even opened up at that 4 for 60 number. Good player, good fit, and yet it's much more nuanced than that. Your grade for the Obi Toppin signing?
I'll give it an A- because I like Obi Toppin. I thought he played really well. He exceeded expectation, developed into a really nice outside shooter for them. The question, which I don't know that we know the answer just yet, and that is, was Obi Toppin a really good player the Pacers had to retain, or does their offense and the way that others are kind of pulled away defensively facilitate for whoever is going to be in that position to kind of put up similar type numbers? But even though $15 million is a ton of money, in the NBA world, it's really not. I certainly think that if that's where the number is, if he is to replicate last year's production, then you get return on investment. So I like it. He's a guy that he was fun to watch, probably could use some help or improvement defensively, but that's most of their roster, truth be told. But I like the 3-point element that he brought to the game, which I think was unexpected. So I'll give it a thumbs up.
That's why this became an obvious re-sign situation to me, is he shot it, right? Because when he came to here, you were around last summer, all the discussion was transition. His fit with Tyrese Haliburton is going to be awesome, and like that matters. That's great. Like playing well with Tyrese Haliburton is really important. But if you can only play when Tyrese is on the floor and do well, it's very limiting. Like there's only so many minutes that's available to you, especially when Siakam's on the team. Once he could hit threes, you can play with anybody. You can literally be in any unit and be effective and help this team. And by the end of his season, he was with the bench all the time, right? He wasn't playing with Haliburton nearly as much as expected, and yet was still extremely effective with that group. He paired well with McConnell and spaced the floor out well for that group. And so I always wonder what one season of shooting means. Like, is he actually going to be a 40% 3-point shooter again? It's always
Correct.
scary. If he's not, then Steele could look not so good. But if he can shoot well, like only 3 guys in the NBA had 100 dunks, 100 threes, as has been very well documented last year, and he was one of them. He could be that guy again. That's great. The reason I can't go as high of a grade on this one, even though he fits so well with them stylistically and personality-wise, is because I feel like they could have squeezed more juice out of this contractually. I think they could, like my prediction was, one, it'd be shorter than this because now Toppin's going to be 30 when he hits free agency again. And I think if he could have been 29, that would have been greater. And I think the Pacers might have preferred a shorter deal. And two is if they could have said, you know what, go get this offer from someone else in restricted free agency. I don't think he could have done it. I think he could have got some good offer, but not to this extent. So I wonder if they could have landed this closer to like 3 for 36, 3 for 40. If they did that, it's a fine contract. He's worth the mid-level exception. It will be tradable, which is going to matter for all these non-star players as they do what you said and head into a window where they could be pivoting to another window. I give this a C+. I think they should keep him, and small market teams should always keep these guys. But I think there are ways that this comes out and everyone goes, it is fine.
Yeah, I mean, again, all those things, all those are valid points for sure, right? Was somebody, oftentimes I think, Tony, with any free agency, you look at not only what a player's worth to you, but then you also look at what you think the replacement value is going to be. Who would you get to replace said player?
Right.
And in the case of Toppin, one would assume or think that they could get other players that would be able to come in and do what he did. But there's familiarity there. He meshed well, he molded well, and he did what was asked of him. So I'm cool with it. They were at Liberty this year. They spent a lot more money than I probably thought they were going to, but I'm cool with it nonetheless.
Yeah, as everybody should want, right? Like if you want to watch his team be good and fun, they kept all the good players, right? And Toppin's a good player. And like you talk about with replacements, he's a dream fit stylistically, right? Like there are, in theory, free agent fours they could have gotten in that price range who are better defensive players, but are they going to provide what he did offensively in terms of the dunks, the threes, the shooting, all the stuff we already talked about with his offensive fit? So the grade not being as high for me here isn't about him. He's good. The Pacers should have wanted to keep him.
Fair.
I thought this would come in lower in terms of years or dollars, but I think that they should be and are happy that Obi Toppin is back with the team. Hey, everybody, let's very quickly talk about FanDuel. I love sports. I love sports so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down in the NBA and the NHL, we get a lot fewer sports. The MLB is going on. Olympics are fun. The WNBA is on hiatus for the Olympics. The sports are not sportsing like we all want to this time of year. And yet here comes FanDuel to save the day. They let you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do, open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel with a daily booster bonus. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Big line item number 3 to me, Andrew Nembhard's extension. I'm not even going to let you talk, Jake. I'm going first this time. A+++. Massively huge deal to me for the Pacers because starters cost $20 million. If you're a good starter at any position in the NBA anymore, you cost $20 million. They now have Andrew Nembhard for 4 years at $60 million in total, and he's only been in the NBA for 2 years, so he's going to get better. This was insanely good value to me. I said leading up to the deadline, I thought, if I'm advising Andrew Nembhard, I'm telling him not to take what the Pacers can offer. I think 3 years was critical because 4 years would have been too long for him, and 2 would have been too short for the Pacers since they already have him under contract for this year and potentially would have had him for next year. So the length makes sense, but I can't believe that within what the Pacers could offer contractually, they were actually able to do this. I know you know this because I've talked to you on We're Here Company before, that I'm very high on him. I think that is the best move grade-wise they made all summer.
Okay, hard to disagree with that. I'll be contrarian here a little bit.
Yes. Okay.
I'll say,
all right, Skip Bayless.
Look, I love Andrew Nembhard. How can you not, right? The guy is cool as the other side of the pillow. He's one aspect from a coma half the time because he's just unflappable. He played differing roles. The thing I love about Andrew Nembhard, and you need guys like this, is on nights when you need him to score 28, he can probably go out and somehow get you close to that. On nights when you need him to not do that at all and simply facilitate or guard, he can do that too, and he's cool with it. So I like all of those things. That said about Nembhard, but Boo is now making his cameo, by the way. That said about Nembhard, and I know that this is like old man yelling at clouds. He's now on the radar. And I'm not saying he wasn't before. I mean, listen, what he did in Los Angeles as a rookie and hitting shot, I mean, he had big games over the course of the year. Certainly by the time you get to the playoffs and the Eastern Conference Finals, people know you're in scouting reports. They've seen film. But he's just more on the radar now. And does that mean that things change for him? We've seen guys that once they get the contract, you realize that you kind of paid for what they've already done as opposed to who they're going to be. There's no reason to believe he's not going to continue to grow, but along with the expectation for him continuing to grow comes the expectation of how teams are going to guard him. That to me is going to be the interesting thing because he's not a super size guy, right? But he's an invaluable guy, certainly in what he was making before. Now at that tag and that amount that he's making, even though it's not killer money, the reality is that the expectation changes and we now measure him by a different scope. How he's going to fill that and meet that expectation remains to be seen.
It's going to be fascinating too, because there's a chance, who knows what happens with McConnell, that he has to play two different roles completely, like all the time, right? He starts next to Haliburton and then as the backup one and covers both of those roles and has to be an important defender. Like if his shot really is plateauing at 37%, like that's a hard role to do and a very important one to have as Boo is appearing behind Jake Queer.
I'm going to ask you, what do you think, Chef?
And for those of you listening, they have thoughts about the grade here. Boo, B, I think that you guys are in sync there.
He's booing my B grade.
That's right. So there are ways that like he plateaus now and has a hard role and it doesn't look amazing, but I think you're paying guys coming off rookie scale deals likely for what they will be worth, not what they currently are worth. That's why sometimes it feels a little high. I don't even think this one feels high. I think he's going to be well worth this deal. And the only way this is like one where you're biting your nails a bit is the Pacers is if he has kind of reached his level, which I don't think he has, but if he has, and Mathurin is awesome, like next year, because then you're paying your third or fourth guard a lot of money to be a third or fourth guard. But even then, you don't really care because it's a super tradable contract. We already heard the Spurs are interested this offseason and teams could be again in the future. He certainly has lead guard capability. So the downsides, all the downsides are like, this is his peak or someone else is awesome. And those aren't even downsides because he's already good and it's fine if someone else is really good.
I mean, he's an impossible player to not like, no question.
Yes. Yes.
And hard, truthfully, and I'll be biased because it's what I drive. I'm the king of bad analogies, Tony. I think you know. Grand Cherokee, right? He's a Jeep Grand Cherokee. If you need to get on the interstate and go 80 and take a nice long road trip and have a good-looking car that does it, it serves that role. If it's snowing outside and you got to go over rocks and apparently through creeks like the commercial, you can do that too. It's very versatile. He does have a versatility that he can play, to your point, 3 or 4 different positions probably, and that flexibility alone has value.
You have the analogies. Is the genie going to appear today on this podcast?
Only Boo, no genie. Just
I haven't had the genie in a while. I'll be ready next time for the genie appearance.
The genie magically appears, man. It depends on what bottled beverage I buy on my way in.
Where do you get it from? Do you get like from the same place every time? Do you go to Rocket Fizz?
It's an excellent question. We're right there on Monument Circle. Truth be told, they have very, very ice cold Diet Mountain Dew at the South Bend Chocolate Company, right there on Monument Circle.
Like 2 feet from where you are, too.
That's
Rocket Fizz is crazy. We're off a path here, but
good place.
It is very cool. And everything I have there, I'm like, that was good. I don't want to have it ever again. Like, I can't even describe it, you know.
Retro, right? You go in and you kind of feel like it's 1950s and you're down.
Yeah, if for those of you who haven't tried it, it's on the Circle. It's got all these throwback candies and sodas. It's quite good. Those were the biggest 3 things they did. And I think a key theme as we keep going is the biggest things they did were all very good, right? Above average grades, good job. That's huge. Some of the other stuff, and we'll get to this in a second, are where the quibbles are. But the stuff that you can quibble on was smaller. And I think that's important for them as they push forward. James Wiseman next, the only external, right now at least, free agent the Pacers signed this offseason. 2-year minimum deal, partially guaranteed in both seasons. I'll let you go first here because I have a feeling we're going to disagree here.
Okay. Do you see, I don't know if you can see it. The lighting probably is skewed, and I apologize for that. Do you see what's hanging and spinning above me?
I don't.
That's a ceiling fan, okay? Couple kinds of fans you can buy. You can buy the little clip fans. I lived in New York City. I had a little clip fan. I clipped it to my bed. Real little fan, right? Ceiling fan, much bigger, much wider, big wingspan. That ceiling fan is me regarding this move. I'm a huge fan of the James Wiseman move. To me, there is absolutely no risk, essentially, because of the money that you're investing or lack thereof. It's a guy that I realize that you don't pay based on where somebody was drafted. But I do think that there's size, there's athleticism, there's talent, and most importantly, there's youth. He is still very young. Wiseman is a guy that, honestly, I mean this, you got to kind of throw out what happens to a guy in Detroit because it's just been a total disaster there, in terms of roster. I think he got buried a little bit from when he was first drafted. I have no idea if he's going to be a significant contributing player, but he's your number 3 center. You're paying him essentially minimum, and you're taking the chance that, in fact, maybe you have something here where it pays off on a guy that was written off elsewhere, and now you've got something. I love it. I think this is a move that can pay off for them. He can spell some minutes, give you quality minutes underneath. Love the move. I give it an A+.
Yeah, a lot of people will agree with you, and the reason you can't you nailed the why you can't give this an awful grade. Like, there's no risk at all, right? People kept saying this is a low risk, high reward signing, and I said no, that's not true. It's a no risk, high reward signing. Like, right. If he sucks, who cares? There's like no money guarantee.
Tony, let's be honest, right? It's probably high. It's probably no risk and moderate return. But
yeah.
What the.
And yet, I say all that to say this is probably the lowest grade I give them for a move this summer because of this. Last year, they had 3 centers who were all capable, and the one who was the most capable, Myles Turner, had a wonderful season. Don't get me wrong, but he also played a lot. And I don't want to poke holes in Myles Turner. I think he's awesome. Played 77 games last year. He had not played 70 games since 2018-19. Before that, it's reasonable to assume he's going to miss more games next year, even if it's only a few more, right? So you have Isaiah Jackson still, and Isaiah Jackson was good in the playoffs and has earned being the backup center for this team. But now James Wiseman's your third center, whereas last year they had more quality third centers, even had Daniel Tice at times on the team. Like, they are not in this mode anymore, and maybe they can get away with it. They're not in the mode where they can like keep going for these development projects and winning. They're trying to win games right now. Like, if they lose 2 games because James Wiseman's their backup 5 that night and he doesn't play well at all, like, that's a huge deal, right? Like, they're trying to be a home court team or a top team.
That would be the alternative is what?
Right. Well, so what I had guessed and what I would have tried to do as the Pacers is my third center hope would have been like a Cody Zeller type of player. Like, not that awesome, but a guy who's probably not going to play that much, but when he is out there because you need a third big, you know what he's going to give you. It's going to be rock solid. Now, here's the thing. That could happen with Wiseman because we've seen every young player that comes here for the last 2 years just be awesome or be better than they were in their last stop. And then I look stupid for saying this, but it is kind of risky in that they're like, the East is really good. They snuck in the playoffs on the last day of the season last year. And again, there's no risk. It's not a bad move. I'm not going to give it like a D or an F, but I just think I'm very surprised they went with the risk project now for their third big when they're in the mode of winning games.
Fair. The only concern would be if Wiseman gets in an opportunity where he doesn't kind of know his role and tries to play above that. I can't see that's going to be the case. Zeller, like I said, Cody Zeller is the prime example of the guy that if you're 7
like
foot,
him, yeah,
you can guard a little bit, you're going to play forever, right? And that's a prime example. By the way, public service announcement, Tony, and I apologize for doing this in the middle of your podcast, but. And then I'm going to try to probably get Boo to go down. But I want to let everybody know, and I know you had a cat, so you understand. But just so you know, what you're looking at right here is a guy that was the longest tenured resident at the hotel downtown. We don't use the proper word in front of Boo. But Boo, longest tenured resident. I walked in and I said, I want the guy that probably has the least chance of landing somewhere. And this guy is like this all the time. So if you are thinking about getting a pet, and you're thinking about rescuing one from one of the shelters in Indianapolis, I can assure you they absolutely know that you do it. And at times when you're trying to do a podcast, yes, they can be a little bit too clingy, but for the most part, awesome companions, awesome pets, and Boo would fall in that category. But Boo, we're going to get you down here under your blanket, okay?
I would share, for those who can't see because you're on audio only, Boo has been hanging out on Jake's chair the entire time, basically. I would share similar advice. I have to shut the door to this room, or I have had to, because my old furry companion it wasn't that she would come in the room. I don't care about that. You heard her on the phone on the radio one time. She just yells constantly, like she was the chattiest cat ever. And so she would interrupt podcasts. And she only did it once ever in years because I let her sleep in the room once and she woke up during it, which is my own fault. So no one ever really got to see Pepper here. But I agree with your general conclusion. And Boo looks very happy to be involved in this process. She leads in there. So maybe I'm being too critical of this because he could be very good. And the pitch for Wiseman is so easy. He's huge and fast. Like, you want to figure out if that can be something if you're an NBA team. And the Pacers are right to say, hey, we've gotten every other player from that draft class to be better here than they were before. So I get what they're doing. Like, I'm not going to crap on this, but I give this a C or a C minus. I think this was the only thing they did that I kind of was like, huh, interesting. I wouldn't have done that, but it's not bad. You gave it a much better grade than me. I'm happy for Cody Zeller that he got signed and traded and got more money than he would have otherwise, by the way. Shout out to the New Orleans Pelicans for helping out the IU guy. All the rest of the stuff they did, super small. Do you have any opinion or grade on James Johnson rejoining the Pacers on a 1-year minimum contract?
Look, he's the king of the 15 contract, full-time contract. Bring him back in 2 days. You know, one note on him, Tony, and I've mentioned this on the radio probably to you. You probably heard me say it. But a lot of times during games, I will watch kind of what goes on the sidelines or on the bench and just see kind of what's going on away from the action on the floor. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen after a defensive lapse or something happens on the floor, Rick Carlisle calls a timeout, guys are coming over, and James Johnson will pull guys aside, notably Aaron Nesmith, who I love. I think you know I'm a huge Aaron Nesmith guy, but
yeah.
He'll pull guys aside, and I can't hear what he's saying, but I can see him pointing things out and pointing out angles, and you can tell just kind of giving advice on what he is seeing. I think he truly is essentially an assistant coach and a player, and I know it's a cliche, but I think that his leadership is invaluable, and it goes beyond just the tutelage of being an older professional player. And then, you know, when you have a Bobby Portis or somebody that's a little bit crazy, it's good to let teams know that you got a little crazy too, right? So I'm cool with it. League minimum, there's a reason he's around. There's a reason. He's a lot like TJ McConnell. TJ McConnell is going to be a member of the Pacers organization, probably beyond his playing days as well, because they love intangibly what he brings to the table. Big dick vital cliche there, but a lot of truth to it. Yeah,
there's a reason they've signed James Johnson to 7 contracts in the last 2 years, right? Like, yeah, they want him around. People say this a lot because it's something you just said I want to bring up. They say, why not just sign him as an assistant coach? I don't know what the monetary value of this is, if it even exists. There is value of the guy who's coming off the bench to do all that stuff you just talked about, practicing with you every day and going through the grind every day and having to be in shape, all like the trenches as people like that matters, right? I think there is some value to that in terms of what you're hearing from that person as a player, right? Even if they are not going to be playing.
Don't forget, Tony, I mean, I realize we're talking the anomaly here, but there has been, it's not totally unprecedented, of times where they needed him to go in and give good minutes where he's done it. Now, it's few and far between, but it has happened.
Yeah, 2 years ago when he was fresh off his time with the Nets, they played him like big minutes against Brooklyn because he knew all their plays and sets really well. Yeah. The other thing that you cannot not put a value on, that I always make up this hypothetical and it could just be nothing, but when they played the Bucks last year in Indy Game 6, Obi Toppin, Bobby Portis getting into it, if there's even a 5% chance Obi Toppin's about to get ejected when they meet at midcourt, and then James Johnson interjects and gets a tech. If that tech prevented Obi Toppin from getting ejected and then winning that game, priceless player. Like,
hey, I know. Like I said, everybody needs a little bit of crazy. Why have a radio job?
And you were very close to that interaction. I give that you can't give that worse than a B, right? Like, James Johnson back makes sense. Last thing, I don't know how you feel about grading draft picks because we've never seen them play. Do you have any actual grading thoughts on their draft?
No, I think what they did was a good job of in that situation. You definitely get in when you start getting into just around the mid-30s, you're talking about players that are basically at the bottom end of guys that are not going to be two-way players.
Yep.
So I think they did a good job of going out and finding guys that fit maybe a brief need of what they do. They're in Tony, the reality is this: the Indiana Pacers right now, they're ahead of schedule, but the schedule's now. The 2 to 3, I mean, the window is now. So what they have is the flexibility to basically take flyers. I hate to use that term, but you're talking about guys that are probably not going to be immediately cracking the rotation as it is. I thought last year Ben Shepherd did a really good job, goes without saying, when his number was called, because he did things and he brought things to them that filled a need. And so they went ahead and took it on him, and they knew he was experienced and old enough that he was going to be comfortable with that as a rookie. The thing to consider with this year's draft is the fact, is Johnny Furphy going to get minutes this year? Probably not.
No.
But
no.
If it works out and he shows you something, then great, you've got a good young player. But I think the Pacers' mindset going into this draft was, in this year's draft, Jarris Walker would again be a top 3 or top 5 pick. Now, they've talked him up a lot, and at some point they're going to have to start showing, and as is Jarris Walker, why they've talked him up and believed in him this much. But I think they took this year's draft class, Tony, to be honest with you, as house money, because they felt like they essentially had a lottery pick in this year's draft in Jarris Walker because of the fact that he was not brought along prematurely a year ago.
That makes sense. I didn't have as much time because the Pacers played into deep May to watch a lot of college basketball in post to see all the good players. That said, with all 3 of their picks, I get it. I get what they see in this guy or why they did it. And that hasn't always been the case. Aaron Holiday didn't get it, right? Cassius Stanley didn't get it. Isaiah Wong last year didn't really get it. All 3 of these guys, even if they don't hit, whatever, I get it. I see why you did this. I see why you made that move. It's kind of all I can say. I can't even grade that. Incomplete. We'll see how they play. I have a beef, though. People say this a lot in sports media. They say, why do people do draft grades? That's stupid. They haven't played a game yet. Well, I say making instant analysis of a pick is exactly what Kevin Pritchard just had to do when he made the pick himself, right? He had to instantly analyze a player and pick them. I think it's totally fair. So I guess I give it a B or B minus. Last thing, we're running out of time on Zoom because I don't know how to pay for real Zoom. Full offseason grade, A to F. What you got?
Man, you got to give it an A, right? I mean, because here's the thing. There are other teams historically that you look at and you say, you can't run it back again. This team, you said, I hope they run it back.
Agree.
And they accentuated it because they kept the roster intact. And, that gives the chemistry and solidarity, which is what made them so good. But then, you have, like I said, a lot of it depends on Jarris Walker, Ben Shepherd, how they continue to grow. But if you get something there and you're adding on to what already was an Eastern Conference finalist team, and yes, I understand the fact that attrition in the conference is part of why they were in the Eastern Conference finals. But you've got Siakam now that is the second half of his tenure here was really starting to hit his stride and figure things out. So the future is very, very bright, and they were able to keep that intact. So I say A. And that's not me being a homer. I mean, I'm being serious. I think A.
No, I think they had a very good offseason too. And if you wanted to define a hypothetical team where you'd say, who should run it back? What NBA team should run it back? You'd say the champs, and you'd say teams that were very successful and very young. And hey, look at that. Conference finals, young team like the Pacers. That makes a lot of sense. And guess who else ran it back? The other conference finals, young team, the Minnesota Timberwolves, are largely keeping their same core from last year, only losing Kyle Anderson of significance. That's how it works. That makes a lot of sense. You know what else makes a lot of sense? Listening to Jake Query every single day talk about Indianapolis sports, because there's always something going on. The Fever are back. The Colts are in camp. I know nothing about that, but a lot of other people do. Jake, where can people find you on the airwaves and the things you have to say on the internet in general?
Well, thank you, Tony. Every day, 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan. That would be those two respective numbers on the FM dial. And then, of course, 107.5, thefan.com. My Twitter or X or whatever we're supposed to call it these days is at Jake Query, which is JakeQuery.
You'll get a lot of posts about good indie stuff that isn't sports on Jake Query's Twitter feed as well, which I, of course, find valuable. And occasionally you can hear me sound like an idiot over the airways instead of on a podcast on Query and Company, although not right now, because Lord knows I know nothing about the Indianapolis Colts and what's going on over there.
Olympics and Tyrese Haliburton's in them. Come on now. Although he's done a lot of what we've done right here, sitting and talking.
I was going to say, well, I don't have a lot of things to say about Tyrese Haliburton's Olympic play. Maybe by the end of the week there'll be something, but I can't. I guess to air this now, I'll talk about him later this week. He probably should not be playing, right? Like, that team is loaded. I don't think they're making any terrible rotational decisions, but whatever. It is what it is.
Got to defend. I hope he learned. Maybe Steve Kerr sent him the message. Got to defend if you want to get on the floor.
That's right.
That's how
you've heard the old classic joke. You know what they call the guy who gets the worst grades in med school? They call him doctor. You know what they call the guy who doesn't play very much for Team USA? A medalist. So
that's right.
I don't think he'll care when it's all said and done. Tomorrow, it's about to be August. We're talking the last steps of the Pacers offseason. Then we're done with free agency until they actually do something. Hope you guys can stick around for that. Give Jake a follow. Listen to what he has to say. Thank you all for listening today. See you very soon.